As a coach or a mentor, many of us use a tool that separates our lives in more than just our professional or our personal lives. And in our work, we ask men to also consider their emotional well-being, their spiritual well-being, relationships, and financial well-being. I call this the integrity challenge. It's a challenge because of how we define ourselves. Many, including me, don't consider more than one or two aspects of our life. And today, my guest and I discuss his journey and how he was able to merge the intersections between technology, spirituality, and personal development. And so I can't wait for you to hear what he has to say. And before we get into that, being a man today has never been more challenging. And so the pain we feel for many of us is real. It's a pain of loneliness, and it's a pain of unworthiness. And it's masked by our feelings of anger and resentment. And it's all because we're afraid and uncertain of what to do or take that next step. And so if you're tired and fed up of where your life is at, I'm going to encourage you to start your hero's quest, where you can become more, accomplish more, and live more than ever before. Go to members.theawakenedman.net and start your quest today. With that, let's get on with today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan DeMonso. When you are asked to introduce yourself, what do you say? Is it more than your career, maybe a father or a husband? And what we share, and when people ask us that question, says a lot about the image we have about ourselves. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's just how we see ourselves. But what if there was more to our lives than just limited visions that we have? How can we expand that vision? Well, that is what we're going to get into today. Allow me to introduce my guest. Constantin Morun is a passionate advocate for personal growth, self-discovery, and professional development with over 15 years of experience. And through his journey from a fear-ridden man hiding his authentic self to embracing vulnerability, authenticity, Constantin has demonstrated that self-discovery can unlock the keys to personal and professional success. So he's integrated this passion from technology, spirituality, and mentorship. And Constantin helps individuals unlock their full potential, empowering members of their audience to live humble and sincere with their insights. Welcome to the show, Constantin. How are you today?
Alan, what a beautiful introduction. Thank you for having me here. And I'm doing excellent. It's a morning where I am. Sun is out, minus 15 degrees Celsius, however many that's in Fahrenheit. Very cold. So living the dream.
Right on. Good to hear. Yes, I'm in the middle of Canada here. I know you're out in Halifax on the East Coast. So great to speak with a fellow Canadian today. And yes, we're about the same temperature here this morning, a little chilly today.
Just a bit.
Yeah. So as you know, in our work here, Constantin, and here at the Revolutionary Man podcast, my opening question for all my guests is get an opportunity, a little insight to hear about your hero's quest, your hero's journey. And so tell us about that time in your life when you knew things had to change. What did you do about it? How was that? And how did that experience shape you into the man you are today and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I love the question. I love listening to how people answer that. Mine, I would say, started perhaps about 3 years ago, coming out of the pandemic, like many people, right? I was working long hours. I work in technology. So part of my job at the time was to enable people to be able to work from home, to be able to be with their family and still bring some money in. And while it was a fulfilling job, it took a lot out of me, long days, 12 hours plus, weekends as well. And eventually I burnt out. What I hadn't realized back then was that I was actually fighting depression for a very long time. In fact, probably most of my 20s and my 30s. But like most men, we go undiagnosed and we don't want to face it. And we say everything is fine. And below the surface, we cry inside, right? And we think everything is okay, but really it's not. So it was about 3 years ago. The pandemic was kind of coming to, well, not the pandemic itself, but the closures were coming to an end. And I thought, okay, you know what? I need to do something about this. However, it took me a long time to even see what to do because I was seeing a therapist here and there. I didn't find a connection. And one of the things that came to my radar multiple times was plant medicine, specifically something called ayahuasca. And I'm not someone that's been into spirituality much before that. I'm not someone that's been attracted to that type of medicine, let's say. I mean, to be honest, I've never even been drunk. I drink occasionally, but I don't enjoy doing that. I don't do drugs or anything. So plant medicine to me was like, okay, why would I do that? But then something kept calling and calling and calling. So I started pursuing, looking into it. And the more I researched, and I'm someone that loves to do research, as you mentioned, I'm in technology. I have a mathematics background. So for me, everything has to make sense logically. So I need to find the science behind it, if there's any available, or at least anecdotal information from so many people that now it starts to paint a picture in my mind. So that's kind of where my journey started.
Man, I love that. And what I really like about what you're saying there is a couple of things. And you'll find I'm going to take lots of notes, Constantin. It's just the way I do the podcast, because I find I learned so much out of this. Is one of the biggest reasons why I do this work here with the podcast. But you talked about something about fighting depression.
Yes.
And, as men, what's one of the things that I find that we really struggle with, and the statistics haven't changed over the last 2 decades. Men still have the highest rate of suicide. We're 4 to sometimes 5 times more likely to commit it. And the challenge is because we do fight, and you talked about this crying inside. And so before I get into the next part of what I wanted to ask you is just talk a little bit about like that, because how did that really feel for you? Like, what was going on for you? How was it after you came out of it? What were the aha moments? Oh, that because of this was how I was doing this, or how I was acting. That's how I recognized the depression. And maybe you've seen that in your clients.
Absolutely. No, I love the question. And I'll be honest with you, even as much as like 6-7 months ago, I thought that my depression was isolated to like last year alone, like 2022. And then as I sat more and did more introspection and sat with myself, I realized that it's been going on for a long time. And the way mine manifested is in a lack of joy and fulfillment in day-to-day life. Now, of course, there were many amazing things happening in my life that would bring me joy, but that joy was not something that was sticking because of everything else that was being piled up on top. And also the sense of fulfillment. Now, keep in mind, I have an amazing career. I work for Microsoft, actually. So I have a senior role. I'm in technology. For a lack of a better term, I have the American dream. Yet I had no joy and fulfillment. I had the shiny toys, no fulfillment, no joy, right? So that's how it manifested for me. Of course, it also manifested in me spending time on things that would just distract me from real world. Meaning, of course, Netflix, like most of us do, but also computer games. I used to be a gamer big time when I was younger. So that was always my refuge, right? Jump into computer games. And I mean, last year, there were times where I would work my job, take my dogs for a walk, and then spend 12 hours playing games, right? Cutting on sleep and everything else just so I can distract myself and feel less pain. And the pain is not the pain most people would think about. I would say those that don't suffer with, let's say, depression and stress and burnout and anxiety. It's a pain where, like, it's not physical pain. It's emotional. It's mental pain. So very, very hard to describe to someone that hasn't had a chance to experience that. And I would argue that almost everyone has experienced a version of it in their life.
I completely agree with that. And it's part of the reason why I'm doing this work. There was pain in my life as well. And I like how you frame that. It's not a physical pain that we can all recognize. We can recognize that physical pain, but when there's that numbing, deep inside pain where we have that, as you said, this lack of fulfillment. Many of us have successful careers. We have the accoutrement, so it looks like a successful and a happy life. But truly, when we get up and we move and we take on the day, we feel less fulfilled because we're not living from a place of purpose and passion. And that's why I like having guests such as yourself on who've have gone through that journey. And then, so that leads me into the next part of your opening. You talked about, being, because you're into technology and mathematics and you want it to be practical.
Yes.
You want it to be able to make sense. It has to be logical. And so now that you've gone through to that part of the journey and you're into this place, into this sphere of personal coaching, how has that influenced your professional life? And what role has spirituality also played in that process?
Okay, Alan, some amazing questions in there. So let's take them one at a time. Now, in terms of the coaching aspect and the mentorship aspect, here's the interesting thing about me. I remember I was even maybe 5 years old when I first started essentially giving back and coaching people and gathering people to play soccer, right? And I've been in a role of a coach or a mentor all of my life, be it in playing soccer since I grew up, tutoring in high school and university, mathematics, physics, all the sciences, be it as a coach, essentially I was big in computer games during my university years, to the point that it could be considered professional. I was making good money out of it. And then moved into playing poker online as a profession for many years. And of course, because I love doing it and I got really good really fast, I was able to coach many people. I coached thousands of people for like a decade in how to be better poker players. And I always focus on the psychology side of it, which I'll come back to in a second, because I didn't realize my passion for psychology until much later in life. And going back to the coaching piece, everything I've done in my life has been me learning something, me going through something, me experiencing something, and then wanting to share with the world and be like, hey, if I've done this, you can do it too.
Yeah.
And I've been a mentor at Microsoft, a mentor in every other corporate job I've had, where people navigate to me or someone gets assigned because they just joined the company, and then we form a relationship. And it's not just me giving back, I'm also learning so much. You mentioned something at the beginning of this, how you love taking notes because you learn so much from these conversations. Well, it's the same for me. Whenever I coach and I mentor, it's not a one-way street. I learn a lot myself. I get challenged as I challenge them, and I learn so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love that. And absolutely. And thanks for sharing the idea of how the coaching piece just really evolved in your career and how you've learned to do that. And what I like, one of the takeaways I had from there, you also talked about, getting, being challenged. And that's really what it is about doing men's work and the work that we do. It's really about, we try to be, I'm careful now. I'm starting to reframe this comment a little bit, because I used to say that our work is really about being a judgment-free zone.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, but when we start into the accountability piece, and that's, I think, where you're kind of leading towards, at least that's my interpretation, that when you're working with people, there needs to be some sense of accountability. And within that, there will be tinges of judgment. But I look at it as, can we be compassionate with it, and how we come across it can be very cruel. And that's what we don't tolerate or allow in our work, but we still want to have some form of accountability. And so the second half of my question, and I know I tend to bunch some questions. I also asked a little bit about, how spirituality played a role. And you talked a little bit about the plant medicine. Maybe if you don't mind expanding a little bit more on that aspect as well.
Absolutely. I would love to. And before I jump into spirituality, I know you also asked about how it impacted my professional life going on this journey. And keep in mind, I am in a senior role. I've been for a while. So technically I was in a good spot. However, by going on this journey, understanding myself better, and like you just mentioned really beautifully, having more compassion, more empathy for others, realizing that it starts with yourself first, and then of course you can give it to others. It made me a much better coworker. It made me a much better person to work with the customers I work with. Because in the past, I would come from judgment. I would be like, oh, someone is late 5 minutes. They don't respect my time. They're always late. And, I'll go on this negative loop that would, of course, ruin part of my day, if not the entire day. Now I come from a place of compassion, meaning like, you know what? I know they have young children. They may need a few minutes. I know, they have some issues at home. That's fine. Or maybe I don't know anything. And should I know, right? Probably not. So we can always come from that place of love. So when I incorporate it into my professional life, because it's just who I am and who I allowed myself to be, because it was always there. It was hidden under the layers of societal, let's call them indoctrinations and school indoctrination and everything else, right? Where kind of the hate is a strong word, but let's say the fear was on top of it, right? And the love was below. And until we could remove the layers of fear, we couldn't get to the real person. And that's what I've been able to do. And it's not the job, 100% done. It's always a work in progress, like an onion. There's layers and layers. And that's where a bit of spirituality comes in. You see, I grew up somewhat religious, but I never practiced.
Right.
I thought I was agnostic for the most part, right? Then things started happening in my life, and I realized that, what, there are forces greater than us out there that we don't understand. At the very least, the connection we have with each other and nature and everything around us, because we are nature. But then when you take a walk in the woods, why do you feel the way you do? I have 2 dogs, and I've always had dogs. The connection I have with them, why is it that way? Right? So then once you start going down that path, you realize that, okay, you know what? if it's God you believe in, your higher self, the universe, whatever you believe in, there is something bigger out there. And it allows you to realize that all of us that have come here on this planet at this time, we have a purpose. Now, for some of us, the purpose might be to just live at the top of the mountain and just enjoy life and enjoy nature. For others, it could be that we come into this life to make a difference, to elevate the rest of the people around us, be it in a small circle or a much larger, like we're seeing people like Tony Robbins or others that are actually influencing large masses.
Yeah, I like how you frame that as well. And I think that's whenever my wife and I get to talk about living for purpose, right? One of the mottos we have here is about living a life of purpose, capital of, intention, on purpose.
Yes.
Deeper intention. And that doesn't mean that doesn't mean our lives are all going to turn into and be superstars and be a president of the United States or a Tony Robbins, whatever, but we have purpose. We get up and we have intention, purposeful intention every day to live our lives. And so thanks for framing that way and reminding all of us that, it doesn't need to be something that's necessarily earth shattering. It could be, that may be the direction that the spirit ultimately takes you. But if that's your end goal, then really I think you have to revisit truly what your purpose and your desire is to be here.
Absolutely. And what I would want to add there, because when we talked about my hero's journey, while it started 3 years ago, it really took off after the plant medicine, after I got to understand a few more things. Also, though, when I uncovered finally my why and my purpose, or at least a part of it, because I know it's something that changes over time slightly, right? As you evolve as a person, of course, your purpose, your why evolves with you as well. And I remember being someone that's always asked questions as to, what's the point of life? It has to be more than just grow up, go to school, have some kids, have a job, and then die. To me, it never made sense. And I remember asking that question over and over as I was a young boy growing up, but I never got the answer, nor did I have the environment where I could find this answer. Now, as I grew older, I kind of started looking into it. And of course, last year when I say it's like early last year, is when I said, okay, you know what, it's time to really take a look at this and see how I can uncover it. It took me months, and now I have a process where I can help others do it in weeks. And it's been transformational, not just for me, but for the people in my life, right? Be it my personal life, my professional life, or the people I coach. Because once you have a strong why, once you have a purpose defined, then you can bring more of the things in your life in alignment with that. And that's when you'll see joy, fulfillment, abundance. And when I mean abundance, I'm not talking just about wealth, money, right? It's abundance in your emotional health, in your physical health, in your mental health, all of it, relationships.
Absolutely. I just really like that. I love that how you're framing that as well. And I think it's important. And to your point there, we do similar work here, is that I take them through a journey, a process. I call it the return of the king. And it's a process where ultimately they end up by crafting a vision statement or purpose statement for themselves. Yes. And what I ask them to do is to revisit that at least annually, because they'll set up their goals and their aspirations for the upcoming year to do that work. And then as things start to evolve, they change. That purpose will start to reshape. It'll get clearer. There'll be subtleties in it. And so that's a great reminder for all of us. It's not a fixed state. We're always unfolding, continually unfolding, the proverbial onion piece. Now we start off this conversation talking about, we're both in Canada. You're on the East Coast. I'm in the center part of the country, but you grew up in Eastern Europe.
I did.
Under a totally different type of government style. And so how did that era shape your perspective on personal growth and resilience, and how it probably really helped shape some of who you are today?
Oh, definitely shaped a lot of who I was, and part of who I am today. So when I grew up, I was born in 1983. And at the time, Romania was a communist country still. And it was entering a period of scarcity and fear because of many things happening around the world at the time, which meant that I was surrounded by people not having even the basics, right? I'm not saying about my family because I was shielded by that. Now, keep in mind, I was a young boy. However, you have that in your society, you have that in your schooling, you have it everywhere. So that permeates and you get imprinted on. And of course, it does. Of course, my parents and my grandparents that raised me were impacted by that. They were doing their best to shield me from it. And I was fortunate with that. And I didn't realize until much later in life. And when I say much later, I'm talking like the last few years, how that impacted me and the traumas that were associated with that. And it wasn't until I dug in through my subconscious, through my limiting beliefs, to realize some of those imprints. One of the imprints that I realized fairly early in my life, and I'm fortunate I did, and I had the opportunity to get out of, was that limited mindset idea and shift into a growth mindset. Because see, in Romania, in many of the Eastern European countries, and it, of course, I see it in North America and Asia as well, and South America, the idea that if you make a mistake, you have to either hide it, get punished for it, or never talk about it. As opposed to when, let's call it a mistake, you do something that doesn't go according to plan, instead of looking at it like, hey, this is an opportunity to learn. You know what? Pat ourselves on the back, we tried. Let's learn and do it better next time. Yes. So when you go in with a limited mindset, which is what I had initially, it doesn't give you as much room for growth. Because how can you grow if you're not going to learn from everything you've done in the past? It's like you have gifts that you left unopened, and they have these magical tools for you to overcome whatever challenges you're facing. And that was a huge piece of my transition. Earlier in my 20s, I would say, is when it started. It really kickstarted in my early 30s. And then when I joined Microsoft, the entire culture is around the growth mindset. Yeah. That's why I can truly understand what it is. And being around people that are that way allowed me to elevate myself much faster.
Wow, that's so powerful. I was just taking a ton of notes there. And one of the things that when you talked about the scarcity and the fear, and really that's what we felt and experienced through the pandemic. Mm-hmm. You know, we continue to see it. I see it now that we're on the other side of this thing, and I see how people are working and how they impact the cure, so to speak. The cure was worse than the actual illness, in my opinion, and where we're sitting at. And I see us in Canada here going in a downward spiral of that type of mindset, of lots of scarcity, lots of fear. And I think we can do that. We can change that perspective for people. Just like you said, maybe in your home environment, you don't notice it, but when everything around you is leading you to believe that that's what the truth is, then we need to shape that and change that perspective. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is really working and having some key principles and strategies. And so I know you have a set that you use in your program. Tell us a little bit about what your key principles and strategies are to help people believe that they can unlock their full potential.
Absolutely. And I agree with what you said, in the sense that the mental health pandemic essentially came out of the pandemic is a lot worse than most people think. And it's not just that I look at myself and I know how I was impacted, but everyone else around me, from family to friends, co-workers, everyone has some sort of impact, or at least knows someone that has had an impact on their mental health, right? So it's up to us to help ourselves first and then be able to help others. Because through my journey, through me being able to help myself, now people around me are getting inspirations from that, but also it's almost like they get permission that they can too go after it and get hope that they can achieve it. One of the things I'm passionate about, and I mentioned to you earlier, just a hint, is psychology. You see, if I could go back in time, I would study psychology over mathematics, but there's a reason everything happened the way it did. Now, why does psychology fascinate me? It's because of what I've uncovered about the human mind, about us as humans, where everything is psychology. If our psychology is weak, which I call it the foundation, right? Then it doesn't matter how good of a mindset you have. It doesn't matter how much you want something, it's not going to happen. So it starts with changing literally three things: the psychology about yourself, so how you think, how you talk to yourself, how you feel about yourself, and then the psychology of the people around you. So I gave you an example with my work, right? If I come from a place of fear, negativity, and that's going to fit it, it's going to impact all my relationships, it's going to impact my feelings, it's going to impact everything I do, my actions. And then, of course, also the relationships you have with people, like who is in your circle. If you surround yourself with people that are always negative, how are you going to try to be positive in the scenario? I mean, you can be, but you're going to be brought down pretty fast. I was that person in many scenarios, right? And the third piece is the psychology about the world around you, right? Because if we turn on the TV and we watch news for a few hours a day and it's all talking about war and, let's say, recession and everything that's bad, because it's rarely anything good on the news. because it doesn't sell, then what's going to happen to your life, right? I mean, of course, you pick up thoughts from that, and then the thoughts turn into feelings.
Mm-hmm.
The feelings turned into action, right? And then the actions turned into what you have.
Mm.
And it's just a repeating cycle. So unless you go back to your thoughts and start changing those, you can't really impact anything. And your thoughts are impacted by your environment. So when I work with my clients, it doesn't matter if it's someone that pays me or someone I mentor at Microsoft or in my personal life. It all starts about with the psychology, with the thoughts we have about ourselves, others, and the world around us. And when we shape that, when we realize that we hold the power for all of that, that's when things start to change. And I see people even within, one conversation with 1 hour have a different outlook on life. And then they're excited to do the exercises. They're excited to say, you know what, I'm going to approach life differently. Because guess what? And Einstein said this very well, right? You keep doing the same things again, you're going to have the same results. That's the definition of insanity. And I fell into the trap most of my life. I thought, you know what, I just work harder at the same thing I did before, and it's going to be better. No, it's not.
Absolutely not, because we continue to grind out the same result, and then we get frustrated. I really like those three aspects of starting within and slowly, expanding that, not just our perspectives and the psychology, but also the influence that we have, because it works in both ways, right? And that comes in. And so when we become aware of that, and as I'm listening to you talk, I came across the quote, "The Essence of Destiny," years ago, and it really lived with me, and still does. It's a real driving motive, and it really starts with our thoughts.
Yes.
Managing our thoughts, because they become words become actions become habits become our character, and our character ultimately becomes our destiny. And so it starts with how we're thinking about things. How are we thinking about it, and the meaning and the stories? And so thank you for framing that piece for us, because it's so true, and that's where we need to stay. And I know you also do work. You're a podcaster as well, and you have the Unleash Yourself podcast. So tell me a little bit about how that came to be. How is it serving the world today? And what's kind of work you're doing with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I jump into that, I just want to add one more thing, because you touched beautifully on the thoughts piece. And I want people to hear this. I mean, I'm someone that I thought that you cannot change your circumstances in certain ways. Your thoughts are your thoughts, and you cannot change that, right? And I was very, very wrong. And I meet a lot of people in my life that think the same way. Now, it might be that, you grew up in Eastern Europe or in Asia, or you grew up in Latin America or North America. It doesn't matter. I see this pattern across the board. Why? Because that's what we see growing up. That's what we see in school. That's what we see in society. However, you can absolutely change your patterns. So what you continuously do is what you'll continuously do, meaning that if you have success in your life, and success builds on success, so the more you do things, so the more self-love you show yourself, the more self-love you'll have for yourself. And then you can extend that to others around you, because you cannot give something you do not have. So if you don't even love yourself, then you're not going to love anyone else, not to the level you could. And that goes, of course, with your passions and everything else. Like if you want to fully get into your passions and give the most in them and get the most out of them, it has to start with you. And that leads me to the podcast, because when I discovered my why and my purpose, after months and months and months of work, and it took me another 6 months after discovering to find out how I'm going to implement that more in my life. The podcast was one of the ideas. Yeah. I said, you know what? There's so many amazing people out there that have overcome challenging things. I want to bring them on the podcast and share inspiration and empowerment with the world. And that's what my show started as, Unleash Thyself. It was about, literally, there's double meaning, right? You can remove the leash that, let's say, society put on you because it confined you in such a tiny box, or your parents or your family. You decide what box you are in. But also because unleashing yourself means you're like essentially becoming who you're always meant to be. And if you're kept small, mostly by yourself usually, because your thoughts keep you small, then you're not going to unleash the best version of yourself. And that's what really the podcast is about, how to help people, inspire them, empower them, guide them, and support them on this path of unleashing themselves as I unleash myself, right? So that's why I call it Unleash Thyself. And right now I made a bit of a shift a few months ago, where I still have guests coming on the show, but instead of twice a week, I have guests once a week. And once a week, I take a topic and I do a deep dive into it. Either with my personal stories, I look at the science side of it, the spirituality side of it. So I do a deep dive into it. For example, I look at things such as gratitude practices. Like, what's the science say behind it, right? Because and I don't really know that being grateful for what you have is going to bring even more things in your life and it's going to make your life better. But they've done research. They're showing the impact they can have. And it doesn't take much. It's like 5 minutes a day, right? And you start realizing all the things you have around you that most other people might want, like even just as simple as clean water, right? And, or some food on the table.
Yeah, we take being in North America here, we take so many things for granted, right? We get up, for the vast majority of us. I know it's not an absolute, but the vast majority of us get up every day, roof over our head, fridge that's got food in it. We have vehicles or modes of transportation that we can get to that's safe, and we forget to have that all the things that we can be grateful for. And one of the things that my wife and I started doing consistently the last couple of years was having a prayer gratitude before dinner, so
yes,
there's saying grace, but we really have made it a gratitude piece of everything that we're grateful for in that moment. And so I think it's important that we do that as people, because we forget, right? We forget that everything that we have is just.
And I love the part that you just said, the word that's really important for people to really think about, the word forget.
Yeah.
Because I'll give you another example, not just with gratitude, right? Of course, we forget what we have and we take it for granted. But look at your own life like that. Let's take it just as an individual level. You forget all the amazing things you've done in your life, all the amazing things you do every day. Why? Because a lot of us, especially if you're someone that wants to achieve more in life, you're always looking at what was not done in a day, in a week, in a month, right? So I remember going to bed and looking at like, oh, I wish I would have done this and this and this. And it wasn't until I started to look at what have I accomplished first that everything changed. And it's not enough to just look at what you have accomplished. You want to add a layer of celebration in it. Like literally celebrate for yourself because you have done some amazing things, right? Even just waking up and brushing your teeth and making the bed, that's worth celebrating. And what happens then? You're rewiring your brain to allow you to see the beauty in everything that's around you and not focus on the negativity, the fear as much. Because again, you're rewiring the brain. You're not forgetting anymore, to your point, right? You're remembering. And the more you remember, the more you will remember, right? So
yeah, what a great way to pivot that. And thank you. And you're saying, you had talked about, what do we normally do? And is we think about, especially if you're, an A-type personality, a go-getter, you're trying to accomplish things and you're thinking about all the things you haven't done. And I was just it just went, yes, it's what I do far too often. Oh, these are the things I didn't do. And maybe instead, I'll start with all the things I did do. Yeah. And the stuff that didn't get done just become the new number one for the next day or the part of that weekly,
exactly.
Right?
So one of the exercises I get my clients to do, for example, is whenever, let's say we're done this interview here in however many minutes, I will first celebrate and say, yes, that was a good conversation. I'll look at what went well first and say, okay, the connection well, the conversation well, these topics went well. And then I look at not what went bad, but rather what could be done better next time. And what it does, it provides you a frame in which you can look and say, okay, how can I improve this? And you can say, okay, for next time. So instead of beating yourself up, because what do most of us do? And that's me included in the past. I'll finish a conversation with you or any podcaster and I'll be like, I can't believe I talked about that and I forgot to talk about that other part. I can't believe I said this in a certain way and I wanted to say it in a different way, right? And you get into this loop where you beat yourself up and that's it. And then it keeps repeating because that's the pattern you're in. So it's about interrupting the pattern, changing the pattern, and then now you have new behaviors that you can drive.
Absolutely. And what I'm hearing you saying is you're really talking about searching for excellence versus searching for perfection.
Yes.
And the reason why I say that is that in searching for excellence, you're looking for like you said, things that I could do better. And searching for perfection is about looking at what I did wrong. And you're going in the similar direction, but it's a different mindset. We've talked this whole interview today has talked really about that fixed mindset. And that's those nuances that we get ourselves caught into, isn't it? Where we think we're on that scarcity side. That's really a scarcity mindset, that perfection prevents us from taking action, right? It makes it's the hidden piece that how we self-sabotage in our goal to get something done. So, because it's not perfect. And that's how I was when I first started. This is the third year into the podcast. That first year of podcasting was really sporadic, right? Because it needed to be perfect. And I stumbled on my words, and I, editing it for hours upon end. And then finally I just thought, after listening to a few podcasts and going, well, there's lots of folks that I listen to that are really, good podcasters, I think, got huge followings, and they're just average people. They're just, let it go. And so I think, that distinction you're bringing forward there is about how we can process is some of those practical tips that we like to talk about here. And so that was going to be my next question, is if you could share a practical tip, maybe another one or an exercise that you take individuals through to help them cultivate a more holistic approach to their personal development.
Absolutely. There's a couple I always recommend, and there's one that will sound crazy. You'll probably laugh. I did the same thing when my mentor taught me this. And it's an exercise that I do now every day, multiple times a day. However, when I share this exercise with people, I only ask them to do them once a day upon waking up and when they go to the bathroom. So this is what I recommend. You wake up, get out of bed, go to the washroom or wherever you have a mirror, look in the mirror, take a deep breath in, put a big smile on your face, and say 4 magical words. And those words are your name, I love you. So in my case, I have a big smile on my face, say, Constantin, I love you. And I look myself in the eyes. And you will cringe. You may even cry. You may even look away the first few times. But what does that do? If you look from a psychology point of view, from a science point of view, just the effort of you taking a deep breath in and putting a smile on your face, you interrupted whatever pattern you're in. Maybe you're thinking about how busy your day is going to be, or you hit your toe on the bed and it hurts now. All that got interrupted, and you're replacing it with a feeling of happiness. Because see, when you smile, like generally smile, dopamine gets released in your brain. And they've done research where it's equal in parts with, like, when you're happy, it could be as good as sex or any other things that bring us pleasure. So it's about bringing yourself in that mood and starting the day on the right foot. But we don't end there, right? So you say, Constantin, I love you, or whatever your name is, right? And then you celebrate, you say, yes. And, you pat yourself on the chest, I do, or you take your hand, pat yourself on the back. Again, you're reinforcing it, because your brain is going to do this. It's going to say, wait a second, that felt good. What happened? Why did it feel good? And then the more you do it, it's becoming a pattern. So then the brain is going to do it automatically. And how did this practice evolve for me? I did it at the beginning in the mornings. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't perfect at the beginning. I was like, this is cringeworthy. I wasn't even looking at myself, right? I was just saying it because that's what I was asked to do. And I didn't really understand. I did a bit more digging, and I'm like, it makes sense. And now, literally, every time I go by a mirror, even in the car, I even sometimes look, when I take a photo, I'm like, I'll turn it to selfie and I'll say that. And I have the biggest smile on my face. It literally changes my entire mood. It's a way to cut my bad thoughts or patterns out really quickly, because then you can take that to the next level and say, okay, let's say I finished a meeting at work and it was tough, and I have these thoughts going in my mind that are not thoughts I want to entertain. It's about interrupting those thoughts and replacing them with something good. So this is one exercise. Take a deep breath, put a smile on your face, do something physical if you can, right? Get up, get walking. Those are all things that one can do. And as soon as you start interrupting more and more and more, again, you're rewiring your brain to do it more and more and more.
I love that for sure. And yes, it is cringeworthy when you first start doing that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's why I say it's a bit crazy. However, it worked for me. It works for everyone I've worked with so far. If they're willing to try it, and I say, try it for 7 days. If it's not for you, toss it out after. No tool is going to work for 100% of the people. However, there's a variation that might. So give it a shot. If it doesn't work for you, no problem. Go to the next thing.
Yeah, it might not work right out of the gate. Like your brain might start to, want to just discard that. What are you doing, right? And all that negative self-talk, that's probably a good thing that's happening, because you're on the right path. And so, yes, absolutely. Give it a shot, give it a chance. And it's something that I do as well. Whenever there's tough time, I'll say, I love you, Alan. And it gives me opportunity to get recentered and focused about what's truly important.
Yes.
And it's just a simple practice and something that all of us can do. And you know what, as guys, at least my experience growing up, there wasn't a lot of that type of love in the house, so to
Oh,
speak.
absolutely.
Right? There wasn't very often that I don't recall very often, if at all, my parents saying that they loved us. As little toddlers being held, I'm the oldest of five. Yes, I could see that playing out. And that's how I knew and recognized that there was love in the home, as well as a few other things. But the idea of someone telling you that they love you, let alone yourself, was foreign for a lot of us guys, right? Because that's not how we were raised, especially if you're my age. I'm in my mid 50s. So it was a different era back then.
Yeah, and I would say that even now I see it all the time.
Yeah.
And another thing that a lot of people haven't done, and I'm looking at my family as well and those around me, not teaching their children how to love themselves.
Yeah.
And that's a big one because I didn't know how to love myself. And I didn't even know what it meant. I thought it was what gurus talk about just to sell a few books and whatnot, right? Because you find that a lot of self-love books out there, but you don't find that in most families where they teach you or they show you how to do it. Because see, us as children, when we grow up, especially between 0 and 7 years old, we are sponges because our conscious mind is not really formed yet. It's all about our subconscious mind absorbing everything. So it's not that even they have to teach us, they have to teach by example.
Yes.
So if they don't have self-love, which most people don't, unfortunately, because they've had a tough life. And like you said, you grew up 50 years ago, I grew up 40 years ago, 35 years ago. Times were tough, right? And you may have grown up in a part of the world where times were tough, maybe war, maybe scarcity, maybe fear, whatever the case might be. So that means those people didn't have the tools either. So we can extend grace to our parents, to our families, understanding that they did their best. However, it stops with us. We have a choice.
Yeah.
So now if you bring someone into the world, it's your responsibility to show and lead by example. That's my take anyway.
Completely agree with that. You mentioned mentors there a little bit earlier in the conversation here today. And so what's been the best piece of advice that you've been given from a mentor or from someone in your life, and how has that served you?
It's a great question. I love it. There's quite a bit that was given to me. I would say one of the most influential pieces of advice that was given to me recently came around having an open mind and what they can lead to. Because see, I always had an open mind, I thought I had, but that came with a bit of judgment behind it. And this mentor helped me see how, even though I have an open mind, you're still clouded by judgment in certain regards. So this was probably a couple of years ago now. And that really stuck with me because when you're talking about mentors, coaches, people in your corner, that's what the value of them is. The biggest value is that they can help you see the blind spots. They can help you see the things you're missing. At least the good ones, right? The ones that are actually in your corner. They'll help you see what your blinders on are not allowing you to see. So for me, it was about removing those blinders and realizing all the beauty around us, opportunities that I have missed otherwise.
That's outstanding. I like that. And yes, absolutely. Having an open mind we can still be clouded with some judgments, and it's about being able to work with that nuance. I'm sure through the course of your career as well that you've read many books, but yes. I wonder if there was a book or two that really stood out for you. Maybe it's one you're reading right now. What's a book that really had a lot of impact for you that you've read?
Yeah, there's a lot of books. You're right. I would say one that I always talk about is Finding Your Why by Simon Sinek. This was probably 6 years ago now. I read it when I joined Microsoft because he happened to have a talk at Microsoft before I joined, and I saw the recording, and I saw the book, and that shed more light on the idea of finding your why, which lets, kind of, I thought as a catalyst for myself finding my own why and purpose, because I used some of his methodologies and thoughts with some of my own, and now to the work I do today, because I truly understood from not necessarily a spiritual side, but more from a practical side, why that's important. And that's when it all clicked for me. And it put me on this journey, essentially.
Nice. Yeah, I love that book for sure. We had a great conversation here today, Constantin, but if there was one piece of advice or something maybe we didn't even get a chance to touch on today, what would be the one takeaway you'd want our guests to have?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that can see video, right here above my right side or my hand here, I have a sign that says follow your heart. And that's truly what I believe life is about. We're so much in our heads, and I'm no different. I've been up there in the head so much, and still am. I'm still learning how to work with the heart in unison. But it's about following your heart. And that means, like we talked earlier, finding your why, finding your purpose, because then you align with your heart, and everything you do, it doesn't matter if it's in a corporate job or out on the construction site or you're a barista at Starbucks, you can do more of what's in your heart, and that will bring more joy, more happiness as a result, more fulfillment, more abundance across all areas of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely something that as men, we need to do more of, to be allow ourselves to be vulnerable. We started this whole conversation about for us being men is being vulnerable. And that's really the underlying lesson that we've been giving you here today. And so thank you so much, Constantin, for being here today and spending time. And I think we've been able to expand people's vision about where and how they can get a better connection with themselves and through their lives. But if men are interested in getting a hold of you and participating in any of our work, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. Thank you, Alan, for that opportunity. So you can go to unleashthyself.com. You can find the podcast on any major platforms or YouTube. And of course, LinkedIn, for those in the professional world, you can find me there as Constantin without the E, Morun, my last name. And of course, if you just want to send me an email, I will gladly talk about anything personal development, professional development, self-discovery, even spirituality at Constantin@unleashthyself.com. That's it.
Love it. I'm going to make sure all that information's in today's show notes for this episode. Once again, thank you so much, brother, for being on the show. Loved our conversation.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much.